Welcome. We'll get started. I'd like to welcome you today to our symposium, Discover the Possibilities, Immediate and Sustained Results Using the t:slim X2 Insulin Pump with Control-IQ Technology. I'm Dr. Jordan Pinsker, Medical Director and Vice President at Tandem Diabetes Care. We have a very exciting presentation for you today with 4 panelists. Dr. Peter Adolfsson will present Optimizing Control-IQ Technology for Patients, a Swedish Approach. Dr. Andrea Scaramuza will present 1-year follow-up on Control-IQ technology after a virtual pediatric camp. Dr. Catherine Barnard Kelly will present Establishing Realistic Expectations for long-term success with diabetes technology. And Dr. Harsimran Singh will present real-world patient experience with Control-IQ technology. We will take questions at the end for all of our panelists. Before we begin, I would like to highlight some milestones that have been achieved since Control-IQ technology was released to the market. There are now over 200,000 individuals using Control-IQ technology, and over 90,000 of those individuals have software updated their pump to add Control-IQ technology. The t:slim X2 with Control-IQ technology is available in over 20 countries, and there have been over 65 peer-reviewed manuscripts and published abstracts on the t:slim X2 insulin pump since 2019. Now, most amazingly, there are more than 60 million patient days of Control-IQ technology use that we have recorded back in the United States and even more in Europe. Now, to begin our seminar, I'd like to present Dr. Peter Adolfsson. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Adolfsson, who is a senior physician at the Hospital of Halland Kungsbacka at Halmstad. He received his medical training at the Sahlgrenska Academy of the Gothenburg University and subsequently went on to specialize in pediatrics, sports medicine, and endocrinology. His scientific activities focus on the impact of diabetes technology, exercise and diabetes in general, and sometimes physical activity beneath the surface, scuba diving. Dr. Adolfsson is the first author of the latest ISBAD clinical practice consensus guidelines related to exercise. Dr. Adolfsson is also one of the original founders of Diasend and participated as a board member until the merge with Gluco in 2016. And in 2017, he received the ISBAD Prize for Innovation due to this work. Dr. Adolfsson leads courses in diabetes technology and has created educational guides regarding the use of real-time CGM and intermittently scanned CGM, always stating that technology must be used appropriately to give the best results. During the last 3 years, he has focused on implementing digital health in diabetes care, and this has also been evaluated in a randomized controlled study. Please welcome Dr. Adolfsson.
Thank you for this very nice introduction, and thank you, Tandem, for the opportunity given to me to talk about optimizing Control-IQ technology for patients. And it's going to be a Swedish approach to start with. These are my disclosures. The agenda is, first of all, diabetes management is not easy, and you all know that. It comes with a number of difficulties. We have now continuous glucose monitoring clinical target consensus guidelines or target values to reach. And I'm going to discuss those when I discuss the study we have conducted. The 12-month controlled study with results from the t:slim X2 insulin pump with Control-IQ technology, but now compared with freestanding insulin pumps and MDI treatment where everyone is using the Dexcom G6 device. I'm also going to discuss our approach to manage onboarding patients to Control-IQ technology at the end. So diabetes management, if we look at this golf course, it can seem beautiful, easy for some, difficult for others. And diabetes is difficult, but in this aspect, golf is a metaphor. You might play golf in sunny weather, no wind, one day, the next day it's raining, wind coming from left or right. And if you are a golf player, you might even play on different golf courses with different difficulties. It's the same with diabetes. The patient meets different days every day. And in golf, you need a full golf bag. You need education and training. This is helpful. In diabetes, you need education and training as well. But automated system is bringing a relief for the patient in these situations. If we look at Control-IQ technology, I'm going to show that it meets all clinical goals as suggested by the international consensus regarding CGM values. And now we actually have a treatment model that is clearly advantage compared to anything else in my clinic. So we are actually faced with ethical choices today. Can we choose something else that is working less good? In this study, we entered with all individuals using the same RT-CGM system, the Dexcom G6, as shown below here. There were no randomization. Everyone in my clinic received information about different choices to make, and this regards both glucose monitoring but also the way to administer insulin, and then they make their choices. This is the way we proceed to create more motivation in the individual. The study was conducted during 12 months with simultaneous downloads between 2020 and 2022. And we now reflect all results in these three groups regarding glycemic control related to the clinical targets for CGM. Above this, not presented today, is the INSPIRE questionnaire, sleep questionnaire, and health economics. This will be dealt with later. This is then the characteristics of the participants. And please note that the MDI patients, they were a bit older. When it comes to gender differences, more girls choose to have the Tandem Control-IQ technology. My wife would easily say that this is because we are the smarter sex. So if we now look at the time in range, 3.9 to 10 or 72 to 180 milligram per deciliter, you have the results on the left-hand side to begin with. We have the -1 month. This is when we start the process to onboarding patients to Tandem Control-IQ. Some came from MDI treatment, some came from Basal-IQ. And in purple, you have the Tandem Control-IQ. In blue, freestanding insulin pump. No SAP, no PLGN with this device. And in green, you have the MDI results. If we then bring on the level we are looking for, 70%, you can easily see that, well, we reached the target from month 1 to 12 consistently and with less variability than the other systems. This is the effect of Tandem Control-IQ technology. We can look at time above range with the same kind of glasses, above 10 or above 180 milligram per deciliter now, and you can easily see that the patients were already in good control with the Tandem Control-IQ technology, and again, now we have the 30% and below to look for. Again, meeting the standard. This is time above range level 1, 10 to 13.9 or 180 to 250 milligram per deciliter. And again, meeting the standard of lower than 25%. A clear difference from the other ones. This is time above range level 2, the really high ones from 14 and above, or 250 milligram per deciliter and above. And here you can easily see that we reached the standard again. This is time below range, less than 3.9 or less than 70. Here, with the 5% as the target to move under, and we are reaching the value with the Tandem Control IQ system. This is level 1, 3 to 3.9, or 54 to 70 milligram per deciliter, now reaching standard below 4. And do this during all study time, from first to the last month. And here we have level 2, and again, reaching the standard almost all months. But month number 7 is with wider distribution. And I want to highlight this because this is about providing feedback and education to the patient. This was one individual who suddenly had 4% below range level 2, meaning below 3. And I asked him about why. Well, he started to give himself extra manual bolus corrections because he provided late bolus doses. And of course, we kind of discussed this, educated him again, and it turned back to a normal procedure and a more proper way to deal with the technology from month 8 and forward. So, of course, we need to interact with the patients when it comes to dealing even with an automatic system like Control IQ technology. This is then statistics. Time in range now, 3.9 to 10 or 70 to 180 milligram per deciliter. And at -1 and start, please note that there is no difference between Control IQ technology or the freestanding pump. It is a difference between Tandem Control IQ and MDI treatment, but this has been seen also in other studies. From month 3, 6, 9, and following number 12, there is a clear significant difference between Tandem Control IQ technology, freestanding pump, and MDI treatment. You can see that we are reaching 77% time in range, and the difference between Tandem Control IQ and freestanding insulin pumps is 7 to 11%, and the difference between Tandem Control IQ and MDI treatment is 11 to 13%. Now to something we are using in Sweden, time in target. We are trying to reach as much as possible between 3.9 and 7.8. It's a kind of triggering target because it's like throwing dart arrows, trying to reach as much as possible 8, 9, or 10, not 7 or no 6. Here we are trying to reach 50% as the target, and you can easily see that we are on target, reaching 56 to 58% throughout the study, and compared to freestanding pump treatment, again, a difference of 7 to 8%, and a difference of 11 to 12% compared with the MDI treatment. And again, significant difference and superior effect by using Control IQ. So how did we actually reach those results? Well, we have digital health, as you all have, probably now due to the pandemic state, but we have it in general. We have tried this out. And we have, first of all, a meeting 2 weeks before start. Then we have the actual start, which will be described. We have a mandatory follow-up after 1 to 2 weeks with a nurse, and then a mandatory follow-up with the doctor after 4 weeks. This is the strategy we bring forward. So what do? Well, before start, we start with correct expectations. You need to explain that this is not a system that works fully automatic. You still have to do something, and you still have to think. and you have to adapt to different situations. The dietitian in our clinic conduct a repetition regarding carb counting. We then check the basal profile, the insulin to carb ratio, and the ISF, correction factor. And the company of Rubin Medical, who is the reseller of the Tandem device, they have a certification process regarding technology. We then add on specific information from our clinic about the revisits, how to download, what to look for, what to do. Then we have a follow-up meeting with the nurse after 1 to 2 weeks, a mandatory follow-up as stated. We follow up downloads all the time. We discuss adjustments of basal profile, insulin to carb ratio, and ISF. And we add, at this stage, prepared profiles. And we verify, hopefully, that carbohydrates are added before meals. It's not done always. And we review the nocturnal control. And the meaning of this is that I want to send them back with a smile. We always get excellent control during the nights. And the parents states that finally we can sleep. And then we review what to evaluate via gluco at home if they want to do that. So we try to simplify the analyzing process. After 4 weeks, again, mandatory, now we discuss adjustments to be made based on perhaps experiences regarding different episodes with shifting insulin resistance. It can be about them being sick, stressed, or on the right-hand side, number 3, the control during weekend or during a period. And then we discuss actions with different profiles. So we try to move them from one profile to the other one whenever needed. And this is just 6 clicks away. And we try to explain that. 1, 2, 3, and then 6 clicks. Easy to do. And then we discuss exercise, which is a specific situation. The work we do with different profiles is that we, as everyone, have the everyday, Monday to Friday profile. We bring on the weekend if it's needed, meaning more insulin in general. We then add the extra, the plus 30% basal, and this is to be used if values are fixed, more or less, at 9 to 12. 9 clicks with the 1, 2, 3 added, and then you are in a stronger engine, so to say. Then we have the sick day, a plus 100% basal and minus 20% adjustments of insulin to carb ratio and ISF. This means more insulin on board whenever you get sick, easy to do. In the past, it was seldom done. It took them 2 days from time to time. And then we have the exercise. And of course, we use the activity exercise, but this is another profile to use. For some cases, this is just something to start with, a minus 40% basal and 50% adjustments of insulin to carb ratio and ISF, providing less insulin during exercise if needed. So we try to get them moving from one profile to the other. And if we look at the specifics about physical exercise, you heard that I'm fond of exercise and I'm also fond of technology. This is the way we work with it. This is physical exercise with different durations, and you have it in green and light yellow. And then we add the exercise activity 60 to 90 minutes prior to the exercise itself. Then we deactivate it close to stop of exercise or delayed a bit afterwards. We add carbohydrates related to IOB, duration and intensity, and we advise the patient to check value, check the screen, be proactive. Add carbohydrates before. If there is an increased risk of hypoglycemia, then add a 0.05 unit approximately 5 to 30 minutes before the start of exercise. This is not cheating, I might say. This is understanding the technology, because this will prevent an autocorrection during the following 60 minutes. And it's such a small extra dose, it will not affect anything. If you then face a problem with hypoglycemia or a tendency of long pauses, you can activate another profile, call this sport, for example, and add this 90 minutes before start of exercise. This is like old school using a temporary basal. And this personal profile could include not only the 30 to 50% reduction of the basal, but also the adjustments regarding insulin to carb ratio and ISF. Still, you have the automated system brought on. Some would like to go off pump. Some activities actually demand that, but then we advise them to go on pump as soon as possible afterwards. So in conclusion, with the Tandem Control IQ technology, we have shown that glycemic targets, meaning time in range, time in target, time above range, time below range, actually are met from 1 month until end of the study at 12 months. I would like to acknowledge the assistance from all participating individuals and their families, of course, the 2 diabetes teams where I'm working. Hollandia V, who provides us with a database called Sharpec with all direct and indirect costs related to diabetes. It's a perfect way to do health economic analysis. Then we have support from MedEngine and Laila Mekri regarding the analysis in that aspect. But I have also received excellent assistance by Rubin Medical, the company in Sweden, who have provided me with unrestricted funding for the project. And last, I would like to show you the summer light of Sweden. This is close to the summer house where I'm living. Just wishing you all a splendid summer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adolphson, for that excellent presentation. It is my pleasure to now introduce Dr. Andrea Scaramuza, who is a pediatric endocrinologist from Cremona, Italy, where he is the head of the Pediatric Diabetology, Endocrinology, and Nutrition within the Unit of Pediatrics. His work is focused mostly on type 1 diabetes and its management, with particular interest on insulin pump therapy, continuous glucose monitoring, advanced hybrid closed-loop systems, micro and macrovascular complication screening and prevention, and exercise. He's the author of more than 100 papers published in high-impact factor international journals. He is the associate editor of the Journal of Diabetes Research and Frontiers in Endocrinology, Pediatric Endocrinology section, and he is a member of the advisory board of Pediatric Diabetes Journal and the World Journal of Diabetes. Dr. Scaramuza served as an advisory board member of ISBAD from 2013 to 2015 and has been the ISBAD treasurer from 2015 to 2019 and was the convener of the 15th and 17th ISBAD Research School for Physicians in Milano in 2015 and in Cremona in 2017. Dr. Scaramuza is the coordinator-elect of the Italian Group of Diabetes Technology. Please welcome Dr. Scaramuza.
Thank you for this kind of presentation, and thank you, Tandem, for inviting me to show you our results of 1 year follow-up on Control IQ technology after a virtual pediatric camp. This is my disclosure. Like 15 months ago, just when the Control IQ technology was coming in the market in Italy, we decided to run this study, and we have the opportunity to upgrade to Control IQ technology 43 participants from 19 centers across Italy. The first idea was to have a in-presence camp to show them how to use the technology as its best. but unfortunately, the COVID pandemic don't permit us to organize the camp in person, and we decided to run a virtual camp that lasted 4 days in November 2020 during the second wave of COVID pandemic and the second strict lockdown we had in Italy. Then we followed up these children for 1 year. We had presented the data at 3, 6, and 9 months, and this data has been published yet. And today I will present to you the 1 year data. Children enrolled were 6 to 17 years of age and were using the basal IQ technology for at least 3 months before upgrading to control IQ. All of them were well educated to use the carbohydrate counting system and had the availability to update the insulin pump to control IQ and to share their data. The virtual camp was run, of course, for each child at his home. We used the Zoom platform to connect all together, and in these photographs you can see how we organize a control room to have under control all the glycemia of all 43 participants during the duration of the virtual camp, and how we organized for them to eat even if each of them at his or her home at the same time and the same things that our dietitian suggested to cook to each family. They also cooked themselves a snack they eat in 1 of the afternoon, and they had physical activity always from home, but all together and under the direction of a physical trainer. We had 43 participants, 23 females, with a median age of 12, a duration of diabetes of 6 years, and a quite good baseline glycated hemoglobin, 6.9. 19 of them were prepubertal at the start of this study. And in this table, you can see how the timing range increased from 64% during the basal IQ time to 76%, and also all the other metrics improved significantly after 1 year observation. And you can see in this slide that all children reach good results just after the first week of use, and at each time point, every 3 months, we had steady results, so they improved to 76 and stay steady for all the observation of the study. And in the same way, the time above 180 decreased significantly, a steady decreased for all the observation, and also the time above 250. Interestingly, 65% of these children meet the goal of timing range more than 70% for all the duration of the study, and quite 60% had also time below range less than 4% or less than 1% if looking at time under 54%. In this slide, it's possible to see how the HbA1c improved during the study, and this is not the GMI, but the measured HbA1c. that was 6.9 at baseline and 6.5 after 1 year of observation. Timing range was steadily good, irrespective of the lockdown periods, also when children couldn't exercise in the open air or doing their usual activity, and this is a thing we observed and we like, of course. And dividing the group according the prepubertal stage or the pubertal stage, we observed the same good results in both groups. Looking at the mean glycemic value, we observed an improvement after upgrading to the Control IQ technology, more pronounced during the night, but also during the daylight hours. Another interesting finding is that irrespective the increase of the mean insulin requirement after 1 year, probably due to the optimization of the therapy, the time below range remain steadily under the recommended target. And looking at this new index that has been recently presented and published by David Kolonoff, that is an index that combine the risk of high value and of low value, and is calculated using the matrix we can have with the CGM. Looking at this new index, we can find that all our children were in the zone A or B, that were the most safe zone for this risk index. And just a couple of words to the evaluation of emotions we introduced in this study. The psychologist of our centers decided to evaluate emotion in our children and used the different colors. Each of the color was matched with an emotion, positive or negative, and each child was asked to draw a picture with the 3 most prevalent emotions, so the 3 most prevalent colors they feel in that moment. And they did this activity before starting the virtual camp, just at the end of the camp, and then after 6 months. Here is an example of what they draw, and specifically all this drawing comes from the end of the virtual camp. And here is the results with a significantly improvement in positive emotion just after the end of the camp, and the improvement was maintained during the 6 months of observation, and the mixed emotion were significantly decreased. So going to conclude, we have a limitation for sure because we lack a control group, but we also have some strength. The multi-center design and the inclusion of children and adolescents from 19 pediatric centers distributed across Italy, and the chat system used for the virtual camp management that was spontaneously continued by parents, providing a possible motivational effect for the group through peer support, especially about data download done every 1 or 2 weeks for all the follow-up period. In conclusion, the virtual educational camp was a useful support in the education of the children who upgraded the basal IQ technology to Control IQ, The improvement of all glycemic parameters was achieved after only 1 week. These data were presented at the ATTD last year and maintained over 1 year follow-up. The median time in range achieved with Control IQ and the virtual camp was 76%. A target time in range over 70 was reached and maintained by more than 65% of participants for 1 year. Maintaining the minimum hypoglycemic range over time indicates the potential long-term benefit of Control IQ technology. Glycemia risk indicators show low risk of both hypo and hyperglycemia in more than half the participants. And 6 months after the virtual camp, there was an increase in positive emotion in all the participants. And just before stopping my presentation, a couple of words about the next step that will be in less than 1 month with another camp, a 4-day camp with the 60 participants, during which we want to look at the time in range, time below range, after different exercise and nutrition strategies. And here, all the people that worked to have these good results from the 19 centers in Italy, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Scaramuza. Our next speaker will be Dr. Catherine Barnard Kelly. Dr. Barnard Kelly, professor of health psychology, specializes in the psychosocial impact and management of illness and long-term conditions. Her long-standing research career spans models of healthcare, process evaluation, quality of life, psychosocial impact, functional health status, psychological burden, and their relationship with biomedical outcomes. Recently, Dr. Barnard Kelly and her team were awarded the FDA MDDT qualification for the Inspire psychosocial measures, the first such accolade for diabetes. Dr. Barnard Kelly chairs the FDA Global Collaborative Community to reduce incidents of self-injury and suicide by people with diabetes. She sits on the editorial boards of several high-impact international journals and research advisory boards, and has published over 230 scientific articles. Please welcome Dr. Catherine Barnard Kelly.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Jordan, and thank you to Tandem for inviting me. I'm very grateful to be here to share some really important insights into how do we set realistic expectations and for whom and how are they realized in this medical model of healthcare in which we exist, so that we're able to support every one of our patients, every person with diabetes, with really maximizing the benefits of these amazing technologies. So there are my disclosures. So when we think about diabetes, what does success mean? And as I mentioned, we live in a medical model of healthcare, and often we focus on glycemic control as a measure of success. But what if that glycemic control comes at such a high cost that it's intolerable? What other markers of success are there for ourselves as healthcare professionals, for our patients, but for our patients and for those that care for them, whether that be their parents, whether that be their parents, their partners in their relationships? What does that mean? Does that mean being free from hypoglycemia? Does that mean being able to sleep through the night with no worry? Because we know that sleep is such a big thing. does that mean that people are able to function positively in a psychosocial way, to go about their everyday tasks and manage their diabetes? Reduce stigma or hassles and feeling normal. And is it possible for all of these different measures of success to be achieved by the use of a diabetes device? So we know that diabetes devices have transformed diabetes management for many, many, many people. And Dr. Pinsker has, there's 65 or more now peer-reviewed articles in high-impact journals that really show the benefits of these devices, both in terms of biomedical, but also from psychosocial and psychological benefit. However, we know that yet not all children and not all young people are able to access and benefit from these technologies. But we know that children using these technologies achieve lower HbA1c targets, reducing their risk of long-term complications. We know that there are inequalities and discrepancies between access for children and young people with type 1 diabetes. And we know that as data is growing, we will learn more about access and uptake of closed-loop technologies. So this is a facetious slide, deliberately provocative. So with all of these amazing technologies that we have had over the years, is glycemic control better? Not terribly. What about quality of life? Is that better? Because surely, if glycemic control isn't optimal, what about quality of life? Well, the reality is actually that quality of life is worsening for many children and young people with type 1 diabetes. And here are some UK data that 62% of children in Wales, for example, require additional psychological support. So now we kind of have this juxtaposition, this conflict between, we know that the research and the evidence and the data shows us optimal glycemic control and improved quality of life associated with closed-loop technologies. So why is this not being mirrored in audit data? Is it that there's a lag? Is it that it will catch up? What impact will COVID have had on collection of audit data? When will we see these benefits reflected in routine clinical care? And for healthcare professional burden has never been higher. Before COVID, more than half of healthcare professionals were experiencing very high levels of of healthcare professional burnout, work-related stress. Now with COVID, it's much, much higher. So we are charged with providing tailored care to each patient based on their individual need. But it can be very, very difficult to understand those individual needs. So how do we do that? What is this patient's perspective? Who is this patient? So we know issues for users of these technologies. We are looking for relief of constant burden and worry associated with diabetes. We know that diabetes and its treatment come with benefits and burdens. And we know that for many of these devices, the burdens are underappreciated by healthcare professionals particularly. But we also know that when tailored to the unique needs of every individual, that actually that burden dissipates and you do get improved physical and mental well-being. We have to have trust in the system. We have to feel in control that we are able to act if we need to do so. And it must be manageable in ways that are practical for everyday living. And alarm fatigue is one of the most commonly cited barriers from an emotional, exhaustive perspective. And also visibility of disease states. It draws attention. So it's about trade-off. But we can tailor onboarding of the system to reduce alarm fatigue, to minimize the burden. So how do we set those realistic expectations when we are recommending or prescribing a closed-loop system? So thinking beyond glycemic control, how will this family benefit? For whom will the benefit be? Will the benefit be for the child, being able to interact more normally and casually and freely with their friends and peers? Or will it be for the parent in terms of reduced anxiety, ability to go to work and not spend so much of your cognitive processing thinking about your child's glycemic control? Is it for us because we're delivering better care, we're getting better outcomes, our patients are doing better on these systems in terms of their diabetes outcomes? And are there any potential hassles, the barriers to realizing these benefits? What are the hassles? What alarms are actually necessary to ensure that we are able to respond quickly and effectively to a problem if it arises? How do we tailor that? Who will be responsible and for what? And what does that mean in terms of clinical care and how we support our families to the best of our ability to achieve these optimal physical and mental health outcomes? So visibility of disease state, for example. When I'm out with my friends, I get asked a lot of questions. Attention is drawn to the fact that my pancreas doesn't work. Every single child with type 1 diabetes is so much more than a broken pancreas. And what's been really interesting in the data that both Peter and Andrea have just presented is that these children are achieving amazing results in terms of their glycemic control. I mean, truly phenomenal results. However, they are not slaves to their diabetes self-management. These children live with joy. And you can see the slides that Andrea presented particularly. These children are engaging in everyday activities the same with all of their peers, and they have joy and happiness in their lives. They are not slaves to diabetes. I would be in an assembly or whatever, and it would be alarming. It's embarrassing. It draws attention to you. Anything that we can do to minimize the burden of disease and therapy frees up emotional effort to just be a happy, healthy child. So what does burden mean? And for whom? And I know I'm kind of maybe laboring the point a little, but for whom is it a burden? We know the glycemic control. We know the worry and the anxiety. We know the stresses and the challenges of different caregivers and schools and family and friends, etc. So by reducing one burden, are we inadvertently creating another burden? And it's about speaking with parents and children and families to understand, how can we tailor this to your life? What are the hassles? What do you find challenging about living with diabetes? Beyond glycemic control, let's just take glycemic control as a given. Tell me about living with diabetes and what hassles you have. And let's see how we can overcome them together so that the burden is relieved for everybody. So as healthcare professionals, our workflows accommodating of personalized support? How do we fit that in to ensure that we're able to provide that tailored support? Accuracy and dependability. We take this as a given because the system is accurate and it is reliable. And it enables children to just be happy, healthy, normal children and live their lives without thinking twice about, are they able to do something? So, for example, this parent, we even allowed her to go on a residential holiday with the school for a week. So the teacher was confident as well. She could participate in every single activity. Invited to go to sleepovers. We could even go out with friends as people were happy to babysit. We had so much freedom and confidence. These are activities that families who do not live with diabetes take for granted. It doesn't occur to them that you're not able to do these things. So having a device that enables you to live the life that everybody else takes for granted is so liberating as a parent. So we know that Control-IQ technology has demonstrated clinical efficacy and proven psychosocial benefits. And we've seen some truly remarkable data presented here this afternoon. And in the literature, there are, like I say, there's a wealth of evidence repeatedly showing the clinical efficacy and psychosocial benefits. We know that the functionality around exercise activity and sleep activity really enable precision glucose control, but equally importantly is they facilitate trust and they enable people to think that tiny little bit less anxiously around exercise, around activity. We know that individualized targets are easily adapted with changing needs through childhood. And as Peter showed, you can see how quickly those adaptations can be made. And the cumulative effects really transform the way that diabetes is perceived and experienced for children and families and their engagement with healthcare professionals and other people that are involved in the child's life. So Corey Hood's team, Persis out at Stanford University, explored just last year preferences. What does an ideal closed-loop system look like? And they conducted semi-structured interviews with 39 youth aged 10 to 25 years and 44 patients. And the burdens were clear. They wanted to lessen user responsibilities to manage glucose for food and exercise on wear or carry devices. They wanted the physical burden to be minimized as much as is possible. But equally, the emotional burdens to mitigate negative emotional reactions to the alarms, to the frequency, to the sound, while increasing feelings of normalcy. These are real everyday burdens that matter when you have to live with diabetes every single day. So what is success? Success is having a device that maximizes physical well-being and maximizes mental well-being, that provides reduced diabetes burden and enables children and healthcare professionals and families to work together to really achieve minimal impact of disease on their lived experience, so we can go from being unhappy to just joyful children. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kath. That was a great presentation. Please welcome now Dr. Harsimran Singh. Dr. Singh leads the Behavioral Health Research Team at Tandem Diabetes Care and works closely with other members of behavioral sciences and cross-functional stakeholders to implement real-world observational studies to better understand the use and impact of different therapies on the lives of people with diabetes. As a health psychologist, Dr. Singh is especially passionate about using patient-reported outcome measures to examine experiences with diabetes treatments and developing interventions to improve quality of life with diabetes. Please welcome Dr. Harsimran Singh.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Pinsker, and thank you to the speakers. You've set the stage for me really well, so I'm not going to waste time trying to introduce my topic. And I also want to especially welcome the virtual attendees to this symposium, so thanks for that. I am going to be talking to you a little bit about our data, our real-world patient experience data that we have been collecting in various studies ever since we launched Control-IQ technology. I think I'm just going to follow up with Dr. Barnard, what she mentioned, right? Whenever we develop and launch new diabetes technologies that have helped improve the glycemic profile for our patients, there is this underlying assumption that it's also reducing burden for our patients. As a healthcare professional who has worked with people with diabetes, I think there's just this general assumption we make that if something has helped improve or a therapy has helped improve their glycemic profile, of course the patient is experiencing less burden. And that might not be the case all the time. And we experience that as well. When we go to clinics, we talk to our patients, just like you said, Dr. Barnard, right? If I am experiencing an HbA1c of 7%, and if I'm killing myself every day and saying no to everything I would enjoy eating, I'm not really living the life I would like to live. And that's the last thing we want to do when we are developing new technologies. We do not want glycemic improvements at the cost of quality of life if we are looking for long-term success. Of course, for a quick 2-week, 3-week period, I think we can have the patient engage with us, engage with the clinic, but if you're looking at long-term outcomes over the life of the patient, it's almost impossible to achieve that unless we are working with the patient and we have maintained or improved quality of life. So this is a very fabulous paper. I really enjoyed this. If you haven't read it, I would highly encourage people to look at this, and it really questions where we are today in terms of diabetes technology. I stole this slide from the National Health Council. They've really done a fabulous job. Instead of publishing 21 papers, I think they've done a brilliant job in trying to show us what matters when we are talking to the patient, right? What matters to people with diabetes specifically. So when we talk about glycemic data, if we are collecting glycemic data as part of observational studies in the real world, that's real world data. But that might not be the most important thing for that patient. So I would highly encourage people, as we are doing studies with new technologies, to start delineating patient experience data from real world data, right? So patient experience data basically is information that really matters to the patient. That is data that is important to the patient. Real world data could be data that we've collected as part of the clinic. However, that might not be the most important thing. And we saw that as part of the studies that we've already heard about today. So I would say let's start looking at that as when we are publishing our papers, let's start delineating what patient experience data really means, and if we are evaluating outcomes that matter to the patient beyond glycemic outcomes. Believe it or not, this was one of the hardest slides for me to put together because we had loads of wonderful quotes that really try to capture the essence of Control-IQ amongst our users, irrespective of age and the prior therapy. So in terms of early experiences, this is pretty much, I just want to give you a glimpse of when we first launched Control-IQ and we couldn't help ourselves and really wanted to go out and see how it was faring in the real world. We did a really fabulous study, and we did interviews with the early adopters of Control-IQ. And one of the questions we asked was, what were your expectations of Control-IQ, and how has it changed your life? And I want to give you a glimpse across the board of what it meant. And this was a lovely quote of a mom who basically said it's changed her life because she can actually offer pizza and pasta to her child at dinner. And being a mom of 2, I understand the importance of pizza and pasta for dinner. So that was really the most important thing for her. A 48-year-old male, he had tried every possible technology that was available, a really astute advocate for diabetes technology, and I liked how he mentioned that he wanted to experiment with Control-IQ and trust on his own. He didn't want to listen to his HCP, and which is good for him. He wanted to test out and see if he could trust Control-IQ. That mattered to him. To see that it was actually working was important to him. And finally, we had a woman who had had diabetes for such a long time, so you can imagine she's lived with diabetes, she's seen everything. Ease of use was what mattered. So just across in the early adopters, right, who we think might be tech savvy, we have such a range of reasons why they might want to attach themselves to Control-IQ and use Control-IQ long term. Again, this is the quick study that we couldn't help ourselves with, and Dr. Pinsker was not part of Tandem at the time. But he was eager about the study as well. And this is something we did, I think, as soon as we had launched Control-IQ. So if you haven't read this paper, I would encourage you to look at that. We had about 1,400 participants. These were early adopters to Control-IQ. Majority of them, I think more than 95%, were Basal-IQ users and had been using Control-IQ for at least a week. So we let them test it out and practice Control-IQ for a while. We introduced baseline questionnaires at week 1 alongside some glycemic profiles. They continued to use Control-IQ for the next 4 weeks, and then we gave them another set of questionnaires and put the glycemic profile. To be very honest, when we planned the study and launched the study, nobody had heard of COVID, and then we got hit with COVID, so we were really backing off. We weren't sure what we were going to expect in terms of the outcomes, but they were absolutely fabulous. So we saw a significant increase in time in range within 3 weeks. And I was telling somebody yesterday that it almost got boring after week 1 because we were really hoping for some really trend-setting curves and graphs, and we really couldn't see anything. It just went up and then stayed up. But we continued in that study, because it was early onboarders to Control-IQ, we kind of really wanted to see what did they think of the system and what it really meant in terms of satisfaction with the device, right? We heard concepts like trust and satisfaction that Dr. Barnard has talked about. If we step back, I think when we look at satisfaction with a device and trust in a device, we might see that there is a very strong overlap. And that's true. We do see overlap between satisfaction and trust. However, when we ask them to kind of tell us the top reasons why they felt satisfied with Control-IQ, ease of use was something that came up overwhelmingly. That was the primary theme as part of our interviews with our early onboarders. And you would think, and it was a surprise to us because most of them were tech-savvy individuals who had been using different devices and technology, but it's just something they felt this relief that they could use the system and just forget about it. Improved quality of life was another important one. And I think one of my favorite things on this particular slide is that diabetes control is important for a patient when they're trying to relate to the technology, use it long term, but it's not the top thing for them, generally speaking. It's about ease of use, how much control do they have on their technology, as well as quality of life. When it comes to trust, these are different things for them, and they're making some very smart decisions. They're not just trusting the device because the HCP prescribed the device to them. They are doing their experiments with the system, and then they decide to trust it. Quality of sleep was something that kind of took us by surprise. We were not prepared at all for the overwhelming positive responses we got in terms of the quality of sleep. But things like, I just sleep much better. This is the first time I have slept ever since I've been diagnosed. But my favorite ones are the spouses who have been telling us directly, I sleep better because she's sleeping better or he's sleeping better. And I think the most recent one that I love to share is of a parent who said, my child has just done stupendously well in her high school because she's been sleeping so well and she's got straight A's for the first time. And I think that was fabulous that he said it was because of Control-IQ. Now, when we first started developing studies, planning studies with Control-IQ, we really wanted to, as I said, look at device-related satisfaction. We just had that confidence in terms of Control-IQ that we would see that improvement in satisfaction, right? And what was the impact of diabetes on a patient's life when they're using Control-IQ? And unfortunately, we did not really see a quick measure, a reliable, valid measure that was able to give us these two concepts. So we did go ahead and develop a scale that we lovingly call the DIDS, or the Diabetes Impact and Device Satisfaction Scale. It's a published, reliable, valid scale, device agnostic. So anybody using any device or therapy can possibly use the scale. But it helped us assess device-specific satisfaction and the impact of diabetes when people were using Control-IQ. And this is just a very quick snapshot of the studies that we have done with the DIDS. And irrespective of baseline HbA1c, irrespective of your prior therapy, different ethnic cohorts have shown significant improvements both in glycemic and psychosocial outcomes using Control-IQ. I'm going to take a couple of minutes to just give you a glimpse of what it looks like. So the impact of diabetes profile is a diabetes-specific quality of life scale that we used as part of our long-term study called the CLEO study. And if you look at this, at baseline, you have different aspects of life that we assessed our participants on. And then we have the 3 months post-assessment in terms of Control-IQ. And you see significant reductions in terms of negative burden of diabetes on different life aspects. And my favorite one is freedom to eat as you wish. They see a significant improvement in the quality of life specific to freedom to eat, as well as relationship with family and friends. I think we presented this data last year at the ATTD. This is the diabetes impact score from the DIDS, and you see a negative reduction. We see a 32% reduction in the impact of diabetes within 3 months of using Control-IQ. And if you specifically look at items like, I'm less likely to miss school and work due to Control-IQ, I do not wake up at night because I don't have to treat my lows, and I have a better night's sleep. So there was a significant reduction in diabetes impact. We see a 24% improvement in device-related satisfaction using Control-IQ, and this was irrespective of prior therapy. So we had a strong cohort of MDIs, prior pump users, including Basal-IQ, and irrespective of that, there was a significant improvement in device-related satisfaction, and you can see why. They thought it was less of a hassle to use. It was far less complicated than their previous devices, and they were more able to feel more control of their diabetes using Control-IQ. I hope you can see this. This is one of my favorite slides. So as I said, we were not prepared to see the wonderful improvements in quality of sleep. So I'm just going to ask you to focus on the green and the light blue. So at baseline, we asked them to tell us about their quality of sleep using their baseline therapy or their prior therapy. And most of the people were saying it was average or poor. But after 3 months of using Control-IQ, we see a significant improvement in their sleep quality. And 96% of the study participants reported improved sleep quality within 3 months of using Control-IQ. These are some of our presentations at the ATTD. If you're interested in seeing how it looks at 6 months, I'm going to invite you to our Saturday presentation. Dr. Pinsker is going to be talking about the glycemic data from our 9-month study, and I will be sharing our 6-month patient-reported outcomes. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Now, before we get to the question and answer session, I'd like to just give you a highlight of what is coming from Tandem Diabetes Care. As you all may know, in 2012, Tandem released our first insulin pump. And by 2015, we had released a sensor-augmented pump with the CGM showing on the pump screen. In 2018, we introduced Basal-IQ technology, a predictive low glucose suspend system. And in 2020, we introduced Control-IQ technology, the advanced hybrid closed loop system we're speaking about today. But what does the next generation of closed loop technology look like? Well, we're looking at a few different factors to think about in future versions of the pump. One is personalization, alternative targets, automated settings optimization, new features around meal boluses and making meal bolusing easier, and enhanced options for exercise. Another really important area that was emphasized by our speakers today is greater ease of use, automatic adaptations, smarter alerts that are more context-aware, additional signal integration, exercise trackers. You can imagine all the possibilities around other biological signals. And of course, new form factors. So with that, we're going to move on to the question and answer session. If you have a question, please come up to the microphone and we'll call on you. And please just introduce yourself and ask your question. But to begin with, I'd like to ask Dr. Adolphson a question. Peter, you really spent a lot of time talking about the importance of training and how important training and follow-up is to achieve the great results you achieve with Control-IQ technology. And in fact, it sounds like, and I think this will resonate with all the clinicians in the room, it sounds like you're taking advantage of a unique feature of the t:slim X2 insulin pump with Control-IQ technology. You are teaching patients that they can have multiple basal rates, multiple profiles, and the closed-loop algorithm will use those different basal rates. So you're making a sick day profile, you're making an exercise profile. How does that work in your clinic? How do you explain to your patients that, they're basically enhancing the function of the algorithm when you're teaching this to them?
Well, I do think that this is part of the process where you actually need to explain the system. And this is why we have this onboarding procedure, the 1 to 2 week feedback and the 4-week feedback. And some issues is always brought up in clinic when they come to clinic. And we might focus on downloads sometimes, but this is a specific thing we tend to discuss. The use of different profiles, why and how. And we explain it mostly by metaphors, so it's easy to understand. And we then ask them to bring your device and we'll show you the six clicks that is needed to change the engine of the system, so to say. And when you are on track again, you just move back with a new 6 clicks. This is using the system. So in terms of describing this as a car, we don't only have a Volkswagen Golf or just one car. We have 5 cars in the same equipment. So we can use the Porsche whenever needed.
Thank you very much. This question came through for Dr. Scaramuza. You mentioned the emotions elicited by patients during the camp period. What did you hear about the burden of care or reduction of burden of care by the parents or caregivers of those children in the camp?
Thank you for this question. That is very interesting. Working with emotion is not easy because it's hard to define what emotion is for real. But using this system, matching a color with an emotion, make things a bit easier. And as we observed for the patients that were more positive and so expressed more positive emotion after the follow-up, also the parents were more satisfied of the system because maybe it's obvious, but when a child is happy, the parent is more happy. When a child is not happy, even if the glucometrics are perfect, the parent is not happy too. So I think that a system like Control IQ and all we have that can improve diabetes management can help on one side the patients, so children, adolescents, but also adults, and in case their family.
Thank you. Another question came in, this one for Dr. Barnard Kelly. You spoke a lot, Kath, about defining success beyond glycemic outcomes. When you are seeing a patient in clinic, how do you have this discussion? What do you ask patients that perhaps we should all be asking our patients about what is success to them?
Yeah. Gosh, that's a good question. Thank you. So it's really interesting. And actually, Andrea kind of summed it up really neatly in terms of emotion, in terms of joy. It's very, very easy to see a sad child. And we have a lot of children who are very sad. And it's very difficult for them to articulate often why they're sad, what makes them sad. And it's not, they kind of go, it's because they've got diabetes. It's not because they've got diabetes, it's because of the impact that diabetes has on their lives. So it's always really helpful. We need discussions around glycemic control. But also, what's equally important is to be able to just to say to children and to say to parents, what is difficult about diabetes? What are the challenges that you're having just living with diabetes? Don't think about glycemic control or your numbers. Just think about, when I think about living with diabetes, what makes me sad? What makes me frustrated? What makes me hard? What makes it hard? And when you can ask those questions And to hear those answers, you're then able as a clinician to provide that support. Often they don't tell us because they don't think that their emotional well-being is relevant to their glycemic control, but it really is. It's so relevant. So if we can help people to think about the impact of diabetes in terms of what is hard and what makes you sad, at that point, we can tailor the onboarding. We can engage differently, engage effectively to minimize that impact so that they're not sad. So like on one of my slides, it says, they could go on a school trip. What makes a child sad is being left at school on their own while everybody else is on a school trip. And then everybody else comes back and talks about it. And they don't want to be your friend because you didn't go, So if you can have a device, teachers, for them to be confident for the child to go to school, to go on a trip, you can relieve sadness.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Another question was sent in for Dr. Singh. Dr. Singh, you mentioned some great results from early adopters in some of the short-term studies. Do you have any long-term results on individuals using Control-IQ technology?
Yes, we do. That was the easiest answer. So we are presenting 6-month data, as I said, on Saturday, and then we have 12-month patient-reported outcomes, including quality of life, that has been accepted at the ADA for an oral presentation. So you'll have to wait, Jordan.
Okay, that's a good preview. Another question came in for Dr. Adolphson for teaching. Again, the importance of teaching and preparing your patients for exercise. Specifically, how much before exercise do you recommend to patients to activate exercise activity and or the exercise profile you set up for them? And does that advice change for high intensity exercise, where they may have a high blood sugar before a low, for example?
This is a very specific and a tricky question. First of all, you noted probably that I want the exercise activity to be added 60 to 90 minutes prior to activity. And the same, of course, regards an added profile like the sport. But with intense exercise comes a possibility of increased glucose values. So we tend to start with this, but then we, as Kath talked about, need to individualize. Then we need to discuss intense physical activity. You might then need the normal profile, meaning it can be enough with activity profile, but you might need another profile having adapted ISFs, meaning you get very small corrections. Because although you are moving into hyperglycemia, you can't use the normal correction factor because then you will face a low one or a pause by the system. So this is why you need to think about the way exercise is conducted and the typical pattern. And this will also be described in the upcoming guidelines from ISPAD regarding exercise.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful and practical advice. A question came in that was sent virtually, identifying who is the ideal candidate to switch to Control-IQ technology. I think it's a question really for all of you, particularly those who are not as familiar with technology. Perhaps they're MDI users going right to sensor and pump. They may not have experience. Is there anything we can share with the audience on the experience you saw in the different studies that you set up in terms of, is there anything special that you need to explain to MDI users? Or has really the transition been that smooth and they were able to successfully adapt and use Control-IQ technology?
So I'm going to take this one first, actually, with some data. And it's interesting because this data is replicated from insulin pump therapy 10 years or so ago and to closed-loop technology very, very recently. And what happened was Julia Lawton at Edinburgh University did some qualitative research with healthcare professionals and asked them about their experience when patients are randomized to the technology. And in both studies, they said, you know, it's really weird because I really didn't think that person was going to do well, and yet they did better than any of my other patients. And you can't, there's no preconceived idea about who is going to do well, because the reality is that actually everybody does well.
Yeah, I would like to emphasize this because Andrea stated that a certain percentage reached the specific targets stated by the CGM target guidelines. We have equal numbers, 70% reaching time in range all months throughout 1 year. There is a certain group who have other difficulties. They might have autism, they might have neuropsychiatric disorders. I have one with Duchenne's disease, having this equipment on. So quite typical patients. And I might say that in all cases, everyone has improved. So the easy answer to Jordan's question will be anyone, actually. But what I do in clinic is that I create like the diabetes Swedish smorgasbord, where I kindly bring all the equipments, talk about them, pros and cons, and then they have the ability to choose. And if a patient can choose between two products, this means that you are increasing the motivation for the chosen system. So that's psychology in a way.
Great.
So for anyone.
If I can add just a personal comment, I agree that Control-IQ technology is for everyone, and everyone can do very well with this system. The only, if you don't want to interact too much with the system, because the system needs to be adjusted according to many factors, and most of the time very personal factors. So if you are available for these, you will succeed with the system.
Great. I think that's a very positive note to end on. I'd like to thank our panelists for these great presentations, and thank you all for attending today. I hope you enjoyed the conference.